A single mother walked 6 miles through pouring rain to get to a job interview. A billionaire CEO sat in his car and watched her the entire way. He didn't stop her. He didn't offer a ride. He didn't send anyone to help. He just watched. She didn't know he was there. She didn't know the interview was at his company. She didn't know that by the time she reached those doors, soaking wet and shaking, she would force him to confront a truth about himself he'd been running from for 30 years. And nothing for either of them would ever be the same. 52-year-old Grayson Sterling had not built a $4.7 billion logistics empire by believing what people told him. He built it by watching what they did when they thought no one was looking. At 6:14 that morning, he sat in the back of a black Maybach S-Class, parked on a rain-slicked street in downtown Charlotte. The leather seats were heated. The air smelled like sandalwood and fresh espresso from a $12 cup his assistant ordered from a private roaster every morning. His Tom Ford suit cost more than most families spent on rent in 6 months. His watch, a Patek Philippe, passed down from no one because Grayson had no family legacy to inherit, caught the glow of his phone screen as he scrolled through candidate files. He was alone. He was always alone. Sterling Logistics moved freight across 31 states with warehouses in 9 cities, a fleet of 42,000 trucks, and contracts with retailers whose names every American knew. Grayson had started the company at 23, with a single box truck, a phone with a cracked screen, and a willingness to drive 16 hours without stopping. His mother, Helen, had been a night shift worker at a packaging plant. His father left before Grayson learned to ride a bicycle. He knew what labor felt like. He remembered the weight of it in his shoulders, the ache of it in his lower back, the taste of gas station coffee at 3 a.m. But that was 30 years ago, and memory, he had learned, was a liar that softened everything it touched. 8 years earlier, a man named Elliot Crane had nearly destroyed everything Grayson built. Elliot was his COO, his closest advisor, the only person in the company Grayson called by his first name. They had built the Southeast expansion together, shoulder to shoulder, 14-hour days, weekend strategy calls, the kind of partnership that felt like brotherhood. Then the auditors found the accounts, 17 shell companies redirecting vendor payments, falsified invoices stretching back 4 years. Elliot had siphoned $23 million while sitting 3 offices down from Grayson, smiling at him every single morning. The betrayal didn't just cost money. It cost Grayson something he couldn't replace, his ability to believe that loyalty was real. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. He said it in board meetings. He said it in interviews. He said it to himself every time someone promised him something. Promises were air, resumes were fiction, references were performances. The only truth was behavior, unscripted, unrehearsed, unobserved behavior. That was why Grayson Sterling, billionaire CEO of one of the largest logistics companies in the Southeast, personally attended final round interviews for a position that paid $52,000 a year. Operations coordinator, mid-level, nothing glamorous, but the role sat at the nerve center of daily freight movement. And Grayson believed that you could tell everything about a person by how they handled pressure no one was grading. His method was unusual. His board hated it. His HR director, Patricia Hollis, had called it invasive more than once. Before every final candidate interview, Grayson visited their neighborhood. Not their home, just the area. He watched how they left in the morning. Did they rush or prepare? Were they frantic or focused? Did they check their appearance, or did they not care? Did someone drive them, or did they find their own way? He never interfered, never introduced himself early, never offered anything. He simply observed. And then he decided. Owen, his driver for 11 years, adjusted the rearview mirror. The rain had picked up. Thick sheets of water dragged across the windshield, bending the streetlights into long orange smears against the glass. "Next address, sir." Owen asked. Grayson looked down at his phone. The file was thin. Michaela Price, 29, single mother. Previous experience in logistics coordination at a small regional firm. Employment gap of 14 months. No vehicle listed. No emergency contact other than a neighbor. On paper, she was the weakest candidate in the pool. 1740 Breen Ridge Court, Grayson said, setting down his coffee. Apartment 3B. Owen pulled into traffic without another word. The wipers beat a steady rhythm against the glass. The heater hummed. The rain kept falling. And somewhere across the city, in a low-income apartment complex with a broken buzzer and a stairwell that smelled like mildew, Michaela Price was already awake, already dressed, already running out of options. The November sky over Charlotte was the color of wet concrete. Not the dramatic kind of storm that made the news or knocked out power lines. This was the other kind. The slow, steady, bone-deep rain that started before dawn and had no intention of stopping. The kind that didn't thunder or flash. It just fell, relentlessly, like gravity had turned personal. Grayson's Maybach rolled through East Charlotte just after 6:30 a.m. The neighborhoods changed quickly here. Glass office towers gave way to strip malls with check-cashing storefronts. Then the strip malls gave way to apartment complexes with chain-link fences and parking lots where half the cars had expired tags. Owen slowed as they approached Breen Ridge Court. It was a 3-story brick building, the kind built in the 80s and never renovated. Metal staircases bolted to the exterior. A playground out front with a broken swing set. Puddles gathering in the cracked asphalt like small lakes. Grayson leaned forward slightly. The car was parked 2 blocks east, beneath a row of oak trees heavy with rain, far enough to be invisible, close enough to see the front entrance clearly. "Engine off," Grayson said. "We wait." Owen turned the key. The heater died. Within minutes, cold began creeping in through the window seals, just enough to remind Grayson that warmth was a privilege, not a constant. He ignored it. His eyes stayed fixed on the building's front door. At 6:47, the door opened. A woman stepped out. Young, slim, dark hair pulled back tight. She wore a navy blazer that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, the kind of blazer that had been carefully maintained despite not being carefully purchased. Dark slacks, practical, clean. No umbrella. In her left hand, she carried a plastic grocery bag, knotted at the top, wrapped carefully around something flat. Documents. She held it close to her chest, shielding it from the rain with her own body. In her right hand, a pair of heels, black, low, professional, dangling by the straps. On her feet, a pair of old running shoes. White once, now gray from miles of wear. She looked up at the sky. Just once. A brief assessment. Not surprise, not frustration, just acknowledgement. Then she turned left onto the sidewalk and started walking. No car, no ride, no one walking with her. Just a woman in the rain, heading east, alone. Grayson watched her cross the parking lot, step over a puddle, and disappear around the corner onto Garfield Avenue. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He counted to 10 in his head, the way he always did before making decisions, and then opened his mouth. "Follow her," he said quietly. "Keep distance. Don't let her see us." Owen looked at him in the rearview mirror. 11 years of driving Grayson Sterling, and he had seen many things. But something in his employer's voice that morning was different, sharper, almost hungry. "Yes, sir," Owen said, starting the engine. The Maybach pulled forward, slow, silent, its headlights off despite the rain, 2 blocks behind a woman who had no idea she was being watched. Inside the car, warmth returned in seconds. Heated leather, climate control, insulated glass that muffled the sound of rain to a whisper. Outside, Michaela Price felt every single drop. Grayson's jaw tightened. She was heading toward downtown. The Sterling Logistics building was 6 miles east. The interview was at 9 o'clock. She has over 2 hours, he thought. That's enough time, if she keeps walking. He settled back into the leather seat and crossed one leg over the other. His coffee was still warm, his suit was still dry, his world was still perfectly controlled. But a question had lodged itself behind his ribs, quiet and stubborn, and it wouldn't leave. How far will she go before she quits? Michaela Price had been awake since 4:15 a.m., but she hadn't set an alarm. She didn't need one. Fear woke her up the way it always did, silent and sharp, sitting on her chest like a stone dropped in the dark. She lay still for 7 seconds. She always counted to 7. It was a habit she'd picked up during the worst months, a way to remind herself that the day hadn't started yet, that she still had 7 seconds where nothing had gone wrong. Then she got up. The apartment belonged to Lorraine Davenport, 68 years old, a retired postal worker, the woman who lived 2 doors down from Michaela's old place before the eviction. Lorraine had a 2-bedroom with a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and a couch that sagged in the middle but was covered with a clean quilt. She had taken in Michaela and Zuri 4 months ago without being asked. She just knocked on the door one Tuesday night and said, "Get your things. You're staying with me until this gets sorted." No paperwork, no conditions, no lectures. Michaela moved through the dark apartment with the quiet precision of someone used to not waking anyone up. She showered quickly, cold water, because Lorraine's hot water heater had been unreliable since September, and Michaela refused to use what little hot water there was before Lorraine woke up. She dressed in the bathroom. The blazer was navy, purchased from Goodwill 3 years ago, for $11. She had dry cleaned it twice since then, both times spending money she didn't really have. The slacks were black, the only pair without a stain or a tear. She'd pressed them the night before with a damp towel and a hot pan because Lorraine didn't own an iron. Inside the left pocket of the blazer, folded into a square the size of a matchbox, was a piece of lined notebook paper. Zuri had written on it in purple crayon 6 months ago, back when the letters were still shaky and uncertain. 5 words. "You can do it, Mama." No period, no punctuation. Just belief. Raw and ungrammatical and absolute. Michaela touched it briefly through the fabric. Still there. She exhaled. She checked her phone. 2 notifications. The first was a weather alert. Heavy rain through midday. Flash flood warning for Mecklenburg County. The second was from the Charlotte area transit system. Route 54, the only bus that ran from East Charlotte to the downtown business district, had been suspended due to weather conditions. Service would resume at an undetermined time. Michaela stared at the screen for exactly 4 seconds. Then she opened her banking app. Balance, $6.40. She checked Uber. The cheapest ride to Sterling Logistics headquarters was $18.12. Lyft was $19.75. She closed both apps. She walked to the kitchen, packed Zuri's lunch for school in a brown paper bag. Turkey sandwich cut diagonally, the way Zuri liked. An apple, a juice box, a note on a yellow sticky. "Have the best day. I love you more than the whole sky." She left it on the counter, next to Lorraine's coffee mug. Then she slipped into Zuri's room. Her daughter slept on her side, arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit named Clover that had been washed so many times its ears had gone limp. Michaela knelt beside the bed, brushed a curl from Zuri's forehead, whispered something too quiet to hear. She stood up, grabbed the plastic bag with her documents inside, slipped on her old running shoes, tucked her heels into her bag, and walked out the front door into the rain. At the bus stop, the bench was empty. The shelter's plexiglass panel was cracked and offered no protection. The digital sign read, "Service suspended." Michaela stood there for 11 seconds. She looked east, toward downtown. 6 miles. She looked at her watch. 6:42 a.m. The interview was at 9 o'clock. She had time, barely. If she walked fast, if she didn't stop. Her shoes were old but polished. Her blazer was second-hand but pressed. Her plan had fallen apart, but her feet kept moving. Michaela Price turned east and started walking. Not because she had a choice, but because choice had been taken from her so many times that the only thing left was the decision to keep going. And that, she had decided a long time ago, was the one thing no one could take. Rain hit her face before she reached the end of the block. Cold, steady, the kind that found every gap in clothing, every seam, every patch of exposed skin. It soaked through her blazer within minutes, pressing the fabric flat against her shoulders like a second skin made of cold and damp. Her running shoes, already worn thin at the soles, began to absorb water with every step. By the second block, they made a soft, squishing sound against the pavement. A rhythm she couldn't silence no matter how carefully she walked. She held the plastic bag against her chest. Inside it, sealed in a gallon-sized Ziploc she'd taken from Lorraine's kitchen, were her documents. Resume. 2 letters of recommendation. A printed copy of the job listing. A photocopy of her Social Security card. Everything she needed to prove she was worth hiring, wrapped in layers of plastic because she couldn't afford to let rain erase the only evidence of her qualifications. Her body stayed dry nowhere, but the document stayed dry everywhere. That was the math of her life now. Protect what matters. Absorb everything else. She passed a gas station on Monroe Road where a man was running from his car to the door, a newspaper over his head, cursing the weather. She passed a laundromat that was still dark inside, chairs stacked on tables, a closed sign hanging crooked. She passed a church parking lot where the puddles were so deep, they covered the painted lines entirely. No one else was walking. In every direction the sidewalks were empty. Cars moved through the rain like fish through murky water, their headlights blurred, their drivers invisible behind fogged glass. She was the only person on foot in a city designed for people with cars. 18 months ago, Michaela had a car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with 167,000 miles and a check engine light that never went off. She had a job, too. Assistant manager at a regional logistics company called Trident Distribution, handling route scheduling for a fleet of 42 trucks across the Carolinas. She was good at it. Her supervisor said so, in writing. Organized, reliable, excellent under pressure. Those words still lived on one of the recommendation letters sealed in plastic against her chest. Then the company restructured. That was the word they used, restructured, as if the act of cutting 23 jobs and closing 2 offices was an architectural decision, a renovation, something clean and intentional. Michaela's position was eliminated on a Tuesday. She was given a box for her desk items and 2 weeks of severance. 2 weeks for 3 years of work. That was the exchange rate on her labor. Darnell left 4 months before the layoff. Zuri's father. He didn't leave a note or a forwarding address, just an empty closet and a utility bill he'd never paid. No child support, no communication, no court order enforced because you can't enforce a document against someone the system can't find. So Michaela became everything: mother, provider, cook, driver, nurse, accountant, bedtime storyteller, early morning alarm. She held every role because no one else showed up for the cast. Then, the dominoes fell. Job lost in March, health insurance gone by April. In May, Zuri developed a severe ear infection that wouldn't respond to the first round of antibiotics. Emergency room visit, specialist referral, follow-up appointment. Total bill, $2,400. Unpaid, sent to collections, credit score destroyed. Rent was due June 1st. Michaela paid it with the last of her savings. July 1st, she couldn't pay. August, she begged the landlord for an extension. September, the eviction notice arrived. October, she and Zuri were out. 74 job applications in 14 months. She kept a spreadsheet on her phone, updating it like a prayer list. Company name, date applied, position title, status. 74 rows. 68 said no response. 6 said interview scheduled. All 6 ended the same way. A polite email. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. We wish you the best. We encourage you to apply again. She never stopped applying. This morning's interview was number 7. Sterling Logistics, Operations Coordinator. Salary, $52,000. Benefits included. It wasn't a dream job. It was a lifeline dressed in a job title. The rain came harder. Michaela's left shoe began making a louder sound, a slap instead of a squish. She shifted her grip on the plastic bag. Her arms ached from holding it against her chest. Her fingers were going numb. But inside the pocket of her blazer, folded small and warm against her body heat, 5 purple words kept her feet moving. You can do it, Mama. 7th time, number 7. 7 had to be different. By the 2nd mile, her body started sending messages she couldn't afford to hear. The cold had moved past her skin and settled into muscle. Her shoulders ached from holding the plastic bag against her chest. Her blazer, soaked through, now hung heavy on her frame, like a wet blanket draped over a wire hanger. The fabric clung to her arms, pulling with every step, adding weight she didn't have the calories to carry. She hadn't eaten breakfast. The last 2 eggs were in Zuri's lunchbox. The last granola bar was in Zuri's backpack. That was the equation every morning. Feed the child first. Whatever's left is yours. Most mornings, nothing was left. Her stomach cramped, a dull, low ache that tightened with each block. She breathed through it the way she breathed through everything. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Keep walking. The rain intensified around the 2-mile mark. What had been steady became aggressive. Drops hit the pavement so hard they bounced back up, creating a mist that rose from the sidewalk like steam from a grate. Then the car came. A silver SUV, moving too fast through the right lane, hit a puddle the size of a kiddie pool, and a wall of brown water erupted from the curb. It struck Michaela from the waist down. Dirty, cold, gritty water soaking through her slacks, splashing up her blazer, dripping off the plastic bag she clutched like a shield. She stopped. 3 seconds. She stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Eyes closed, fists tight. Rain hammering her face, every nerve in her body screaming the same word. Stop. Stop walking. Stop trying. Stop pretending this will end differently than every other time. 3 seconds. Then she opened her eyes, looked down at the plastic bag, peeled back the knot just enough to check. The Ziploc inside was still sealed. The documents were still dry. Her resume, her letters, the job listing, all of it untouched. She was soaked from head to toe, freezing, exhausted, hungry, humiliated by a stranger's carelessness. But the only thing that mattered was still protected. That was the math. That had always been the math. She could break. The papers could not. Michaela retied the bag, shifted it back against her chest, and started walking again. If I stop, nothing changes. If I keep walking, maybe everything does. She said it in her head like a metronome, 1 sentence per step. If I stop, nothing changes. If I keep walking, maybe everything does. The words became rhythm. The rhythm became motion. The motion became the only thing keeping her upright. She crossed Independence Boulevard at the 3rd mile. The intersection was wide and exposed. No buildings to block the wind, and for 30 seconds, the rain hit her sideways, driving into her left ear, blurring her vision. She held the bag tighter and leaned into it like a sailor leaning into a gale. 2 blocks behind, the Maybach crept forward through traffic. Grayson Sterling had not moved from his position in the back seat. His coffee was cold. His phone had buzzed 14 times. He hadn't touched either. He was watching a woman drown on dry land, and he couldn't look away. She's still walking. Grayson said. The words came out quieter than he intended, as if speaking too loudly might somehow reach her through the rain and the glass and the distance he had chosen to keep. Owen glanced in the rearview mirror. He had been Grayson's driver for 11 years. He knew when to speak and when to stay silent. This morning, for the first time in a long time, he chose to speak. "Sir, she's completely soaked. It's 38 degrees out. Should we offer her a ride to the office?" "No." The word landed hard in the quiet car. Owen's hands tightened on the steering wheel, just slightly, just enough for Grayson to notice. "She doesn't know who we are," Grayson continued, his eyes still fixed on the figure moving through the rain ahead. "She doesn't know she's being watched. That's the point. I need to see what she does when no one's looking, when there's no audience, when there's no reward. Words are free. That's why they're worthless." The motto played in his head like a recording. He had built his entire philosophy on it. Resume lie. Interviews are performances. References are scripted. The only thing that tells the truth is behavior. Unobserved, unrehearsed, uncompensated behavior. And right now he was watching the purest form of it he had ever seen. A woman walking through a storm because she had no other option and refusing to stop because she had something worth walking for. But Owen's question had planted something uncomfortable beneath Grayson's ribs. A splinter he couldn't quite reach. He was testing her. Fine. He had tested every final candidate this way. But none of them had ever been walking 6 miles in the rain. None of them had ever been this desperate. And none of them had ever made him feel like the test itself might be the cruelest thing in the room. "She could get sick," Owen said, not looking in the mirror this time, just staring ahead at the road. "Pneumonia, hypothermia. She's not dressed for this." "I'm aware," Grayson said. "Then why are we still following her?" Grayson didn't answer because the honest answer was one he wasn't ready to say out loud. He was following her because she fascinated him. Because her refusal to stop contradicted everything he'd come to expect from people. Because in 30 years of hiring and firing and managing and observing, he had never once seen someone choose suffering over surrender with this kind of quiet, unperformative resolve. But there was another reason. Darker, less noble. He was following her because it cost him nothing. He was warm, she was not. He was dry, she was not. He was watching her pain from the comfort of heated leather, and some part of him, some part buried beneath the suits and the empire and the philosophy about words being worthless, knew that his inaction was its own kind of test. Not of her, of him, and he was failing. Owen kept driving. Grayson kept watching, and 2 blocks ahead, Michaela kept walking. Unaware that the man who would decide her future was measuring her from behind tinted glass while doing nothing to ease the weight she carried. Somewhere around the 4th mile, Michaela's phone buzzed in her back pocket. She almost didn't answer. Her fingers were numb and clumsy, and pulling the phone out meant shifting the plastic bag to one arm, exposing the documents to rain for the seconds it took to check the screen. But the caller ID said Lorraine. Michaela stopped under the narrow overhang of a closed barber shop. It wasn't much shelter, just 18 inches of aluminum awning that cut the rain from a downpour to a drizzle. She pressed her back against the locked door and answered. "Hey, Miss Lorraine. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, baby. Zuri's up. She's eating her breakfast. She wanted to talk to you before I take her to school." A rustling sound. Then a small voice, bright and clear, untouched by the cold and the dark and the math of poverty that governed every other part of Michaela's life. "Mama?" Michaela closed her eyes. "Hey, baby girl!" "Mama, is it raining?" Michaela looked out at the street. Water poured from gutters in thick streams. A trash can had tipped over in the wind. The sky was so dark it looked like evening, not morning. Rain fell so hard it created a roar, a constant white noise that swallowed every other sound. "Just a little," Michaela said. Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. "Don't forget your umbrella," Zuri said. Michaela pressed her lips together, swallowed once, twice. "I won't, baby. I won't forget. Are you going to get the job, Mama? I'm going to try my very best. I wrote you a note. Did you bring it?" Michaela's free hand moved to the left pocket of her blazer. Through the wet fabric, she felt the small folded square of paper. Still there, still dry against her body heat. "I brought it," she whispered. "I always bring it." "Good. Because you can do it, Mama. I wrote it so you'd remember. I remember, baby, every single day. Okay, I love you more than the whole sky." Michaela opened her mouth. No sound came for 2 full seconds. Then softly, like a prayer spoken to no one and everyone at once, she said, "I love you more than the whole sky and all the stars in it." The call ended. Michaela pulled the phone from her ear, stood under that aluminum overhang for another 5 seconds, wiped her face with the back of her hand. Rain or tears, it didn't matter which. The result was the same. Wet skin, burning eyes, and a reason to keep walking that no storm on earth could wash away. She tucked the phone back into her pocket, shifted the plastic bag to both arms, stepped back into the rain, and walked faster than before. Scientists have a word for what Michaela Price carried that morning. Not in the plastic bag against her chest, not in the blazer pocket where a child's note stayed folded and dry. They mean something deeper, something that can't be soaked by rain or broken by rejection or erased by 74 unanswered applications. They call it grit. In 2007, a psychologist named Angela Duckworth began studying why some people succeed where others, equally talented, give up. Her research, conducted across military academies, spelling bees, corporate boardrooms, and inner-city classrooms, revealed something that surprised nearly everyone. The strongest predictor of long-term success was not intelligence, not talent, not education, not connections. It was the ability to maintain effort and interest over years despite failure, despite adversity, despite the complete absence of visible progress. She called it grit. And she found it in the most unlikely places. Not in the offices of billionaires, not in the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies. Grit appeared most often in people who had been told no so many times that the word had lost its power. People who woke up every morning facing a wall and chose to push against it anyway. Not because they believed the wall would move, but because standing still was worse. In America, 31.2% of single mothers live below the poverty line. That's nearly 1 in 3. And the average job seeker in the United States sends between 100 and 200 applications before receiving an offer. For women with resume gaps, for mothers without reliable childcare listed on their applications, for candidates from zip codes that hiring algorithms quietly filter out, that number climbs higher, much higher. Michaela's 74 applications in 14 months were not an exaggeration. They were not dramatic fiction. They were Tuesday. Grit is not loud. It doesn't give speeches. It doesn't post motivational quotes or attend conferences or write books about itself. Grit is a woman waking up at 4:15 in the morning without an alarm. It is cold water because someone else needs the hot. It is checking a banking app that shows $6.40 and then putting on shoes and walking east into a rainstorm because east is where the interview is, and walking is the only verb left in her vocabulary. But Michaela didn't know any of those studies. She had never heard of Angela Duckworth. She didn't have language for the thing inside her that refused to stop. She just knew that her daughter needed her to keep walking, and so she did. By the 5th mile, her legs had stopped hurting. Not because the pain was gone, but because her body had moved past pain into something else entirely. A numbness that wasn't physical. A stillness in her chest that felt like resignation's quieter, braver cousin. Acceptance. Not of defeat, but of the cost. This is what it costs, she thought. This is what it costs to try again. And I'll pay it because I've been paying it for 18 months and I haven't gone bankrupt yet. The rain had thinned slightly. Still falling, still cold, but the violent sheets of earlier had softened into a steady, almost rhythmic curtain. Michaela could see farther now. The buildings ahead were taller, the sidewalks wider. She was entering the business district, and with every block the world around her grew. Cleaner, newer, more expensive. A silver Honda Accord pulled up alongside her at a red light on 4th Street. The window rolled down. A woman in her 40s, curly hair under a rain hat, reading glasses perched on her nose, leaned across the passenger seat. "Sweetheart, you're soaking wet. Can I give you a ride somewhere?" Michaela looked at her. Warm car, dry seats, heat blowing from the vents, hard enough to ripple the woman's scarf. It would take 2 minutes, maybe 3. The Sterling building was less than a mile away. She could be there in the time it took to buckle a seatbelt. She almost said yes. The word rose in her throat like a reflex. Yes, please. God, yes. But something stopped her. Not pride, not stubbornness. Something older and quieter than either of those. She had asked for help so many times. From Darnell, who left. From the landlord, who evicted her. From the unemployment office where she waited 4 hours and was told her paperwork was incomplete. From 6 interviewers who smiled politely and chose someone else. From a system that saw her as a statistic and processed her accordingly. She had walked 4.5 miles through a rainstorm, alone, hungry, freezing, and she was still standing, still moving, still holding dry documents against a wet chest. If she got in that car, she would arrive at the interview dry and comfortable. But she would arrive owing someone else for the last mile. And she was tired of owing, tired of depending, tired of arriving somewhere and knowing that she only got there because someone else carried her. "I appreciate it, ma'am," Michaela said. Her voice was hoarse, her teeth chattered between words. "But I need to do this myself." The woman stared at her for a long moment. Not with pity, but with something closer to recognition. As if she'd seen that look before. Maybe in her own mirror. Maybe in another life. "You're something else, you know that," the woman said softly. "I'm just a mom," Michaela replied, "trying to get to work." The woman smiled, nodded once, rolled up her window, and drove away. Michaela stood at the intersection for 3 more seconds. The light turned green. She stepped off the curb and kept walking. 2 blocks back, behind tinted glass, Grayson Sterling sat, perfectly still. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on his knees. He had watched the entire exchange. Owen glanced at the rearview mirror. In 11 years of driving Grayson Sterling through mergers and lawsuits and funerals and celebrations, he had seen many expressions on his employer's face. Anger, calculation, control, satisfaction, boredom. He had never once seen confusion, but that is exactly what he saw now. Confusion, and beneath it, something Owen couldn't quite name. Something that looked, if he had to guess, like the first crack in a wall that had been standing for a very long time. Grayson said nothing. Owen said nothing. The Maybach rolled forward, and the distance between the billionaire in the car and the mother in the rain stayed exactly the same. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. Grayson had said it 1,000 times. In board meetings, in interviews, to himself in the mirror on mornings when trust tried to creep back into his chest and he had to beat it down with logic. But sitting in the back of that Maybach, watching a woman refuse a stranger's kindness because she needed to finish what she started on her own 2 feet, the sentence played differently in his head, like a record he'd been listening to for 30 years that suddenly skipped and landed on a note he'd never heard before. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. Fine. Then what was walking worth? What was the price of 6 miles in 38-degree rain with no umbrella, no breakfast, and $6 in your bank account? What did it cost to hold a plastic bag against your chest for an hour and a half? Because the documents inside mattered more than the body carrying them. What was the going rate for turning down a warm car from a kind stranger, because you'd rather arrive soaking wet on your own terms than dry on someone else's. If words were free, then what Michaela Price was doing right now was the most expensive statement Grayson Sterling had ever witnessed, and she was paying for it with her body, with her comfort, with every calorie she didn't eat this morning so her daughter could have eggs instead. A memory surfaced, uninvited, unwelcome, 30 years buried, and suddenly, right there, clear as glass. Helen Sterling, his mother, before she married Richard, Grayson's stepfather, before the house in the suburbs and the two-car garage and the version of stability that eventually let Grayson go to community college and then build an empire. Before all of that, Helen had been alone. 23 years old, one son, no degree, working the night shift at a packaging plant off Industrial Boulevard in South Charlotte, 12 miles from their apartment. And one November night the Buick broke down, transmission dead, couldn't be fixed until Friday, and it was Tuesday. And Helen didn't get paid unless she showed up, and she didn't show up unless she got there. So she walked. Grayson was 5. He didn't remember all of it, but he remembered the shoes. His mother's white sneakers by the front door when he woke up in the morning, soaking wet, soles peeling, lined with newspaper to absorb the water. And, next to them, her work boots, already dry, already ready for the next shift. She never told him she walked. He figured it out years later, doing the math in his head. No bus ran that route after 10 p.m. No cab company served that part of town. And Richard wasn't in the picture yet. She just walked, 12 miles alone at night. Because showing up was the only option. And Helen Sterling was not a woman who confused difficulty with impossibility. Grayson hadn't thought about those shoes in 30 years. He was thinking about them now. Outside the windshield, Michaela was approaching the business district. Less than a mile to go. Her pace hadn't slowed. If anything, she was walking faster. Her back was straight. Her arms were locked around that plastic bag. She looked like a woman marching into battle with nothing but the decision to show up. Grayson's throat tightened. He swallowed once, then again. "Owen." "Sir." "Phi. When she gets to the building, call Janine at the front desk. Tell her to have a cup of coffee ready, hot black, and hand it to the woman who walks in wet." He paused. "Don't tell her it's from me. Don't tell her anything. Just give her the coffee." Owen looked in the rearview mirror. For the first time that morning, something in Grayson's face had changed. Not softened exactly. More like shifted. Like a wall that had been standing for decades had developed its first hairline crack, thin as a thread but running deep. "Yes, sir," Owen said. And that was all. No grand gesture, no revelation. Just a cup of coffee, ordered quietly from the back of a luxury car, for a woman who would never know where it came from. But it was the first thing Grayson Sterling had given anyone in 8 years without calculating what he'd get back, and it terrified him. The Sterling Logistics Building rose 14 stories of glass and steel against the gray Charlotte sky. Michaela saw it from 3 blocks away. She had looked it up on her phone the night before, memorizing the address, studying the exterior on Google Street View, so she wouldn't hesitate at the entrance, wouldn't look lost, wouldn't give anyone a reason to doubt she belonged. She didn't belong. She knew that. But she was here, and being here was enough for now. 6 miles, 1 hour and 47 minutes. Her phone's step counter read 13,214 steps. She didn't check it. She didn't need a number to confirm what her body already knew. Every muscle ached. Her feet felt swollen inside waterlogged shoes. Her blazer was a cold, damp weight on her shoulders. Her fingers were stiff and tinged blue at the tips. But she was on time. 8:51 a.m., 9 minutes early. She pushed through the revolving door into the lobby, and the warmth hit her like a wall. Climate-controlled air, 72 degrees, wrapping around her soaked body with a gentleness that almost made her knees buckle. Marble floors, tall ceilings, a massive photo of a silver-haired man in a dark suit on the wall behind the reception desk. She didn't look at it long. She had somewhere to be first. The restroom was on the ground floor, third door past the elevator bank. She walked quickly, leaving wet footprints on the marble, hoping no one noticed. The door closed behind her, and for the first time in nearly 2 hours, she was alone in a room, with walls, with a ceiling, with a mirror. She set the plastic bag on the counter, opened it, pulled out the ziplock, ran her fingers across the sealed edge. Dry. Everything inside, perfectly dry. Resume, letters, documents, all of it untouched. She exhaled, a long, shaking breath that carried the weight of 6 miles. Then she went to work. She pulled off the running shoes, stuffed them into the plastic bag, slipped on the black heels she'd carried the entire way. They were dry. They fit. She stood 2 inches taller, and something in her posture changed immediately. Like the shoes remembered a version of her she was still trying to get back to. She took off the blazer, held it over the sink, and wrung it with both hands. Water poured out in a steady stream. She wrung it again, until it was damp instead of dripping. She put it back on, pulled the lapels straight, smoothed the shoulders with her palms. Her hair was plastered to her head. She finger-combed it back, pulling it into the tightest low bun she could manage without an elastic. Found a single bobby pin in her pocket, secured it. Not elegant, but neat, controlled. She looked in the mirror. A woman stared back at her, eyes bloodshot from cold wind, skin pale from exhaustion and low blood sugar. Blazer darker at the shoulders where the water still clung, but posture straight, chin level, gaze steady. Not perfect, not even close, but ready. She reached into the left blazer pocket, pulled out the folded square of lined notebook paper, purple crayon, 5 words. She read them once, slowly, like a prayer she'd memorized but needed to hear again anyway. "You can do it, Mama." She folded it back along the same creases, placed it in the breast pocket of the blazer, left side, over her heart. Then she picked up the Ziploc bag, straightened her shoulders, and walked out. 14 floors above, Grayson Sterling stood at the window of his corner office. The glass stretched floor to ceiling, overlooking the main entrance below. He had entered through the parking garage, taken the private elevator, spoken to no one. His suit was still perfect. His coffee had been refreshed. His morning looked exactly like every other morning in the fortress he had built around himself. But something was different. He watched the front door. At 8:52, it revolved, and a woman stepped through. Wet blazer, black heels, straight back, head held level despite the slight tremor in her shoulders that even 14 floors of distance couldn't hide. She was shaking, but she was walking forward, and she didn't look down once. Grayson pressed his palm flat against the glass. It was cold. He held it there for 5 seconds. Then he turned, picked up his phone, and called Patricia Hollis. "I'll be sitting in on the final interviews today." A pause. "Sir, this is for the coordinator position. You don't usually attend these. Today I do." The waiting room on the 4th floor of Sterling Logistics was designed to make people feel small. Not intentionally, probably, but the effect was the same. 12-foot ceilings, gray carpet so clean it looked painted, leather chairs that whispered money when you sat down, a glass table with neatly fanned copies of Forbes and Bloomberg Business Week, a water dispenser with cucumber slices floating in it. Cucumber water in a waiting room for a $52,000 a year job. Michaela sat in the second chair from the door. She had chosen it, deliberately. Not the first chair, too eager, not the last, too passive. Second, present, visible, but not desperate. 3 other candidates sat in the room. A man in his late 30s in a charcoal suit so crisp it looked like he'd removed the tags that morning. A woman in a burgundy blazer with a leather portfolio and a confidence that filled the room like perfume. And Brent, Mid-20s, blue suit, expensive watch, hair slicked back with something that smelled like sandalwood and certainty. They were all dry, every single one of them. Perfectly groomed, not a hair displaced, not a wrinkle visible. They had arrived by car, by Uber, by lives that included the option of getting from one place to another without drowning along the way. Michaela was still damp. Her blazer had dried enough to pass at a distance, but up close, the fabric at her shoulders was noticeably darker. Her shoes were dry, yes. Her documents were dry, absolutely. But her hair was still slightly wet at the nape, and a single drop of water rolled down the back of her neck every few minutes, cold and persistent, like a reminder of every mile she'd walked. Brent noticed first. He leaned toward the woman in burgundy, angling his body away from Michaela, but keeping his voice just loud enough to carry. "Did she swim here?" A snort, a covered mouth, eyes that flickered to Michaela and then away, quick enough to pretend they hadn't. Michaela heard it. She felt the words land on her skin the way the rain had. Cold, targeted, designed to soak in. She did not react. Not a flinch, not a glare, not a tightening of her jaw. She simply opened the Ziploc bag on her lap, removed her resume, and reviewed it one more time, page by page, line by line, as if the only person in the room was her. The resume was pristine, crisp white paper, clean ink, not a single wrinkle, not a single smudge, not a single drop of water. She had carried it against her chest for 6 miles through a rainstorm, wrapped in plastic, shielded by her own body, and it had arrived in better condition than Brent's arrogance. She exhaled quietly, the tiniest release of tension. Then the front desk receptionist approached. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her name tag read Janine. "Excuse me," Janine said, stopping in front of Michaela and holding out a paper cup with a lid. Steam curled from the opening. "Someone asked me to give this to you." Michaela looked at the cup, then at Janine. "I'm sorry, who?" "I don't know, hun. I was just told to bring you a coffee." Black. Michaela reached out and took it. Her fingers, still cold, still slightly blue at the tips, wrapped around the cup like it was the first warm thing she'd touched in hours. Because it was. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the second word. Not from sadness, from the shock of unexpected kindness in a room where someone had just laughed at her for being wet. Janine smiled, nodded, walked away. Michaela held the coffee with both hands, let the heat seep through the paper and into her palms and up her wrists and into the part of her chest where 6 miles of cold had settled like stone. She didn't drink it right away. She just held it, the way you hold something you didn't earn and don't understand but desperately need. Brent watched the exchange from 2 chairs over. No one brought him coffee. No one brought anyone else coffee. Just the woman with the wet blazer and the dry resume, and the quiet refusal to be broken by a room full of people who had never walked 6 miles for anything. Michaela took her first sip at 9:11. Her name was called first at 9:13. The room was smaller than she expected. A rectangular table, 3 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other. Hers. A glass of water already poured. A notepad and pen placed neatly beside it, as if someone had decided in advance that she might have something worth writing down. On the far side of the table sat 2 people. Patricia Hollis, HR director. Blonde hair pinned back, glasses, a warm smile that felt practiced, but not fake. Beside her, Dean Whitaker, VP of Operations. Tall, lean, gray at the temples. The kind of man who read every resume with a red pen and believed that doubt was the most useful tool in hiring. Between them, a 3rd chair, empty. Michaela noticed it immediately. Noticed the way it was angled slightly toward the table, as if someone had been sitting there recently and left, or was expected to arrive. She didn't ask about it. She sat down, placed her resume on the table, folded her hands in her lap. Her fingers were still cold. She pressed them together to stop the trembling. "Ms. Price," Patricia began, glancing at her file. "Thank you for coming in. We appreciate you making the time, especially given the weather today." "Thank you for having me," Michaela said. Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed this opening 40 times in the mirror at Lorraine's apartment, 30 more times in her head during the walk. "I'm happy to be here." Standard questions followed. "Tell us about your experience. Walk us through your previous role. What software are you familiar with? How do you handle competing priorities?" Michaela answered each one carefully. She knew logistics. She had coordinated routes for 42 trucks at Trident. She understood scheduling software, inventory management, vendor timelines. Her answers were solid, not spectacular. Solid. The answers of someone who had done the work but lacked the polish of a candidate who'd spent a decade climbing corporate ladders. Dean Whitaker wrote notes the entire time, short, clipped strokes. He hadn't smiled once. Then he looked up. "Ms. Price, your resume shows a 14-month gap in employment. That's significant. And the role you're interviewing for requires someone who can manage high-pressure logistics across multiple regional offices simultaneously." He paused. Let the silence do its work. "What makes you think you can handle that kind of pressure?" Michaela's hands tightened in her lap. She felt the familiar pulse of panic. The voice that said, "You don't belong here. You're a fraud. You walked 6 miles to sit in a room with people who will see right through you." 3 seconds of silence. Then she spoke. "Mr. Whitaker, for the last 18 months, I've been managing a household of 2 on a monthly income of 0. I coordinated emergency shelter placement for my daughter across 3 facilities, 2 food banks, and 1 state medical assistance program. All simultaneously, all with different eligibility windows, different documentation requirements, and different deadlines. I tracked every application on a spreadsheet on my phone. 74 job applications, each one customized to the listing. 6 interviews, each one prepared for as if it were the only chance I'd ever get." She paused, not for effect, but because the next sentence was the truest thing she'd ever said in a room full of strangers. "I've been managing supply chains my whole life, Mr. Whitaker. I just didn't have a title for it." The room went quiet. Patricia's pen had stopped moving. Her eyes were wide, not with pity but with recognition. The kind of look that said, "I've underestimated you, and I know it." Dean stared at Michaela for a long moment. His red pen was still. His jaw tightened. He didn't nod. He didn't smile, but he didn't argue either. And for Dean Whitaker, silence was the closest thing to concession. Michaela exhaled. Her hands loosened. The panic receded. Not gone, just quieter, pushed down by something stronger. She was still wet, still cold, still the woman who had walked 6 miles to sit in a chair she wasn't sure she'd earned. But she had answered the question. And the answer had come from a place no certification could teach and no resume could capture. Then the door opened. Michaela heard it before she saw it. The soft click of a handle. The whisper of air shifting as the room's pressure changed. Footsteps on carpet, measured, unhurried, the kind of walk that owned every room it entered. She turned her head. A man stepped through the doorway. Tall, silver-haired, a dark suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body that morning. He carried nothing in his hands. No folder, no phone, no coffee cup. Just presence. The kind that makes a room rearrange itself without being asked. Patricia straightened. "Mr. Sterling, we weren't expecting you." "I know," he said. Nothing else. He walked to the empty chair, sat down, unbuttoned his jacket with a single, practiced motion, placed his hands flat on the table. Michaela felt her stomach drop. She recognized him. Not from the walk, not from the car she never saw, from the lobby. The massive photograph behind the reception desk. Silver hair, dark suit, the same face, only now it was 3 feet away, looking directly at her with eyes that gave away absolutely nothing. Grayson Sterling, CEO, the name at the top of the building, the top of the letterhead, the top of everything. And he was sitting in the empty chair, watching her. Patricia and Dean exchanged a glance. This was irregular. Grayson Sterling did not attend coordinator interviews. Not officially, not visibly. Whatever was happening, it wasn't on the schedule. Grayson studied Michaela for exactly 5 seconds. Her blazer, still damp at the shoulders. Her hair, still slightly wet at the edges. Her hands folded on the table. Steady but not quite still. A faint tremor. Cold or nerves, probably both. But her back was straight. Her eyes were forward. She did not look away. She did not apologize for her appearance. She did not shrink. "Ms. Price," Grayson said. His voice was calm, controlled. The voice of a man who chose every word the way a surgeon chose every cut. "I have one question." Michaela swallowed. "Yes, sir. Why didn't you reschedule when you saw the weather this morning?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Patricia's breath caught. Dean's pen froze mid-line. Michaela looked at Grayson Sterling. At the man who had everything. At the man who had never in his entire adult life been forced to choose between walking 6 miles in the rain or losing the only chance he'd been given in 14 months. She didn't rehearse her answer. She didn't calculate. She just told the truth. "Because I've been waiting 14 months for someone to give me a chance. I've sent 74 applications. I've been told no 6 times. This morning the bus was canceled and I couldn't afford a ride. But I could walk. So I walked." She paused. Her voice didn't waver. "I wasn't going to let rain take this away from me." The room was silent. Not the polite, professional silence of an interview pause. Real silence. The kind that fills a space when something true has been spoken and no one knows what to say next. Patricia's eyes were shining. Dean's pen was on the table, untouched. And Grayson Sterling, the man who had built a $4.7 billion empire on the belief that words were worthless and only actions mattered, sat perfectly still. Because he wasn't looking at Michaela Price anymore. He was looking at Helen Sterling, 23 years old, white sneakers by the front door, soaking wet, lined with newspaper, ready for the next shift. His jaw tightened, just once, just enough. A crack, so small, that only someone who had been watching him for 11 years would have noticed it. 2 floors below, in the lobby, Owen sat in a leather chair near the entrance, waiting. He couldn't see the interview. He couldn't hear it. But somehow, in the way that people who know other people deeply sometimes just know, he felt something shift. Like a wall somewhere high above him had just developed a fracture that would never fully close. Here is something most people don't talk about. The systems we build to find talent are remarkably good at filtering out the people who need opportunity the most. Studies on hiring practices have shown that interviewers form judgments within the first 7 seconds of meeting a candidate, not based on answers, not based on skill, based on appearance, the firmness of a handshake, the brand of a bag, the condition of a pair of shoes. Researchers call it affinity bias, the unconscious tendency to favor people who look, dress, and carry themselves the way we do. But it goes deeper than clothing. In the United States, studies have found that resumes with addresses from lower-income zip codes receive significantly fewer callbacks than identical resumes from affluent neighborhoods. The same qualifications, the same experience, the same words on the same page. But the zip code whispers something the hiring manager hears without knowing they're listening. And what it whispers is risk. For single mothers, the bias doubles. A gap on a resume, even one caused by raising a child alone while navigating eviction and medical debt and the collapse of every safety net that was supposed to hold. Reads as instability, unreliable, flight risk. The language of hiring is clinical. The damage is personal. And then there's the question no one asks out loud, but everyone is thinking, can she really commit to this role? She has a kid, no partner. What happens when the child gets sick? What happens when school calls? What happens when the math of single parenthood collides with the demands of a 60-hour workweek? Michaela had the skills. She had the experience. She had walked 6 miles through a rainstorm and arrived 9 minutes early with documents so dry they could have been printed that morning. But every system she had encountered for 14 months was designed to see her wet blazer before her resume, to see the gap before the grit, to see the zip code before the person. Grayson Sterling's interview room was no different, except for one thing. The man sitting in the empty chair had watched her walk, and for the first time in his career, he was asking himself whether the system he trusted was measuring the right things. But Michaela didn't know any of that. She just knew the interview was over, and now she had to wait. The conference room on the 14th floor had a long walnut table, 8 chairs, and a view of downtown Charlotte that made the city look orderly and manageable from a height where poverty was invisible. Patricia Hollis sat at one end, Michaela's file open in front of her. Dean Whitaker sat across from her, arms folded, red pen resting on his notepad, like a weapon he hadn't decided to use yet. Grayson stood by the window, back to both of them, hands in his pockets. "She's underqualified," Dean said first. He didn't waste time. That was his strength and his limitation. No degree, no certifications, 14 months out of the workforce. Her last role was at a company no one's heard of, managing a fleet 1/10 the size of Oz. On paper, she's the weakest candidate we've seen today. Patricia tapped her pen against the file. Her answers were strong. The supply chain response was genuinely impressive. She understands logistics at an instinctive level. Instinct doesn't run a regional routing operation, Dean countered. I need someone who can work the software, manage vendor timelines, and handle pressure from 9 regional managers who don't care about anyone's personal story. I need competence, documented, verified, measurable. You need someone who shows up, Grayson said quietly, still facing the window. Dean paused. Sir, Grayson turned around. You want measurable? Fine. She walked 6 miles in a rainstorm to get here. She arrived 9 minutes early. Her documents were in perfect condition. Her shoes were changed. Her blazer was wrung out by hand and put back on. She sat in a waiting room where another candidate mocked her, and she didn't flinch. She opened her resume and reviewed it like she was the only person in the room. He walked to the table, placed both hands flat on the surface. I'm not hiring her because I feel sorry for her. I'm hiring her because she walked 6 miles in the rain and showed up on time with dry documents. That's not desperation, Dean. That's operational excellence. Dean's jaw tightened. And if she can't handle the systems, if the gap in her resume means she's rusty, if the personal situation affects her reliability, then she's gone, Grayson said, no hesitation. 90-day probation, standard terms. Same expectations as every other hire. No special treatment, no lowered bar. If she can't do the job, she goes. Same as everyone else. Patricia looked between the two men. So, we're offering her the position. We're offering her the same chance we offer anyone, Grayson corrected. She just has to prove she deserves to keep it, the same way everyone does. He paused. The only difference is, I already know what she's willing to walk through to get here. Most candidates, I have to guess. Dean uncrossed his arms slowly. He didn't agree. Not yet. But he didn't argue either. And in that room, with that man, silence was permission. Patricia made the call that afternoon. Michaela answered on the second ring. She said nothing for 4 full seconds after hearing the offer. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of 74 applications and 6 unanswered prayers, she said, "When do I start?" Michaela Price started at Sterling Logistics on a Monday. She arrived 40 minutes early. No one asked her to. Week 1 was disorientation, dressed as orientation. New badge, new desk, new software system she'd never seen before, a proprietary routing platform called SteerPoint that required 3 days of training just to navigate the dashboard. The learning curve was steep. The pace was relentless. Routes needed coordination across 4 regional hubs. Vendor calls started at 7 a.m. Reports were due by 5. She made mistakes, small ones, a misfiled shipment code, a vendor callback she forgot to log, a report formatted in the old template instead of the new one. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to notice, enough for the whispers to start. The rumor traveled through Sterling Logistics the way rumors always travel through large companies, fast, distorted, and impossible to trace back to a single source. The CEO hired her personally. Some said it was charity. Some said it was worse. Nobody knew the details. Everybody had a theory. Michaela felt the stares. In the break room, in the elevator, during team meetings where her contributions were acknowledged with polite nods but no follow-up questions. She was the outsider, the anomaly, the woman who arrived with wet hair on her first day and didn't explain why. She didn't explain anything. She just worked. By week 3, something shifted. It started with a routing anomaly she noticed while cross-referencing Tuesday delivery schedules with Wednesday pickup windows in the Piedmont corridor. 3 trucks were being dispatched to overlapping zones within the same 4-hour block, creating redundant mileage that no one had flagged because the system treated each route as an independent variable. Michaela pulled the data, ran the numbers by hand because she didn't trust her SteerPoint skills yet. Double-checked on her phone calculator during lunch. The overlap was costing Sterling Logistics $14,000 a month in unnecessary fuel, driver hours, and wear on the fleet. Every month, for at least the past 2 years. She brought the finding to her team lead, a quiet man named Russell, who had been at Sterling for 9 years and had never once been surprised by anything. He was surprised. "How did you catch this?" he asked. "I looked at it the way someone looks at a budget when they only have $6, Michaela said. "You notice every penny that doesn't need to be spent." Russell took it to Dean Whitaker. Dean took it to operations. The fix was implemented within 2 weeks. $14,000 a month recaptured. $168,000 a year. Found by a woman who'd been on the job for 21 days. By week 8, Michaela was the first person in the office every morning. 6:40 a.m., before the lights were fully on, before the coffee machine had finished its first cycle. She used the quiet hour to review the previous day's routing reports, flag discrepancies, and prepare her morning briefs. By the time her team arrived at 8 o'clock, she'd already built the scaffolding for the day. She was also the last to leave. Not every night. Not when Zuri had school events or when Lorraine needed her home by 6 o'clock. But most nights she stayed until the work was done, not until the clock said it was time to go. Lorraine picked Zuri up from school on those evenings, fed her dinner, helped with homework, read her bedtime stories about butterflies and elephants and brave little girls who weren't afraid of storms. Michaela called every night at 7:30, without fail, without exception, even when the call was only 2 minutes long, even when all she said was, "I love you more than the whole sky." Day 90 arrived on a Thursday. Michaela sat in Dean Whitaker's office at 3 p.m. for her performance review. The room was small and functional. No art on the walls, just charts, metrics, and a window with a view of the parking lot. Dean opened a folder. Inside was her evaluation. 3 pages typed, thorough. He had reviewed every metric personally. Attendance, accuracy, initiative, peer feedback, supervisor assessment. He read through the results without emotion. Satisfactory. Above average. Exceeds expectations. The checkboxes were clinical. The conclusion was not. At the bottom of the third page, in his own handwriting, Dean Whitaker had written one sentence: recommend for full employment. No reservations. He signed it, dated it, closed the folder. Congratulations, Ms. Price, he said. His voice was flat, professional, but he made eye contact when he said it. And for Dean Whitaker, that meant something. Michaela nodded. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. She walked out of his office, closed the door behind her, and stood in the hallway for exactly 5 seconds. Then she pressed her back against the wall, covered her mouth with one hand, and cried, silently, briefly. The kind of crying that happens when something you've been holding together for a very long time finally gets permission to let go. That evening, Grayson Sterling received an email from Dean Whitaker. No subject line, no attachment. Just 2 words in the body. You were right. Grayson read it once, closed his laptop, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he left the office before sunset. The trouble started 6 weeks after Michaela's probation ended. It started the way most trouble does in corporate environments. Not with a confrontation, not with a public accusation, but with a conversation that wasn't meant to be overheard. Victor Hale was a senior regional manager who had been with Sterling Logistics for 14 years. He managed the southeastern corridor. He had numbers that consistently met targets. He had a corner office on the 12th floor and a reputation for being thorough in ways that made some people respect him and other people avoid him. Victor believed in process, in documentation, in the measurable, verifiable, quantifiable truth of data. He did not believe in exceptions, in stories, or in hiring decisions made by a CEO who hadn't sat in on a coordinator interview in over 3 years and then suddenly appeared for one. It bothered him. Quietly at first, then less quietly. During a routine background audit of new hires, a detail surfaced that Victor had not expected to find. Michaela Price had been evicted from her previous address 16 months prior. Her credit score was below 500. She had an outstanding medical bill in collections, an unpaid utility balance, a history that, when reduced to numbers on a screen, painted a picture of financial instability that Victor found difficult to reconcile with someone handling daily logistics worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He brought it up in a management meeting, not with malice, with precision. I'm not questioning her work performance, Victor said, leaning forward at the conference table. I'm questioning the risk profile. We've given operations access to someone with a documented history of financial instability. How can we trust someone with our logistics operations when she can't manage her own finances? The room was quiet. Not because the question was unfair. It wasn't unfair. It had logic behind it. The kind of logic that looks reasonable on paper and devastating in practice. The kind of logic that confuses circumstances with character and poverty with incompetence. No. Patricia Hollis pushed back gently. Her performance metrics are above average, Victor. Dean signed off on her evaluation personally. Dean signed off on 90 days, Victor replied. I'm talking about the next 90 and the 90 after that. Patterns don't lie. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. In a company of 4,000 employees, a senior manager's doubt travels faster than any memo. Within 2 weeks, Michaela noticed the change. Not in the work itself. The work was the same. Routes, schedules, vendor calls, reports. What changed was the air around the work. A silence in the break room when she walked in. A pause in conversation when she joined a group at the coffee machine. Eyes that lingered a second too long on her badge, on her desk, on the same face they'd been looking at for 3 months but were suddenly seeing differently. She didn't know Victor's name. She didn't know about the meeting. She didn't know that her credit score had been discussed in a room with glass walls and expensive chairs by a man who had never once been evicted from anything. But she knew something had shifted. The way you know it's going to rain before the first drop falls. The air changes, the pressure drops, and you start bracing for something you can't see yet. One night, she sat on the floor of Lorraine's living room, helping Zuri glue cotton balls onto a paper cloud for a school project. The apartment was warm, the lamp was low. Clover, the rabbit, sat propped against a pillow, supervising. Michaela's phone buzzed. An email. She glanced at it. Internal newsletter. Nothing urgent. But the act of looking at it pulled her back into the building, into the hallways, into the silence that had started following her like a shadow. She thought about quitting. The word appeared in her head, fully formed, like it had been waiting there all along. Quit. Leave. Find something else. Somewhere no one knows your credit score. Somewhere you don't have to prove you deserve to exist in a building you helped make more efficient. Mama. Zuri's voice pulled her back. Her daughter looked up at her with brown eyes that held no knowledge of credit scores or background checks or the weight of being judged for the worst chapter of your life. Do you like your new job? Michaela looked at her daughter, at the cotton balls, at the paper cloud, at the purple crayon tucked behind Zuri's ear, because she always kept one close, just in case she needed to write something important. I love it, baby, Michaela said, and her voice didn't waver. I love it so much. She put down the phone, picked up the glue, and pressed a cotton ball firmly onto the paper cloud, holding it there until it stuck. She wasn't going anywhere. 3 floors above Michaela's desk, in a corner office with a view of the city, Grayson Sterling sat reading Victor Hale's email. He read it once, read it again, then closed his laptop without replying. He turned to the window. The city was lit up below. Thousands of lives visible only as moving headlights and glowing windows. Somewhere out there, a woman who walked 6 miles in the rain was deciding whether to stay at a job where someone had decided her past mattered more than her present. Grayson said nothing, did nothing, not yet. But his jaw was tight and his hands, resting flat on the desk, were not relaxed. Meridian Foods was a $2.3 million account, and Sterling Logistics was about to lose it. The problem had been building for months. Delayed shipments, missed delivery windows, complaints from warehouse managers across 4 states who kept receiving freight 12 to 18 hours late. Always during the same period, November through February. Winter. Victor Hale managed the Meridian account. He had thrown every resource at the problem. Rerouted trucks, added drivers, extended shift hours. Nothing worked. The delays kept happening, predictable as snowfall, and every missed window cost Sterling credibility it couldn't afford to lose. Meridian's procurement director had sent a formal notice. Fix the delays within 30 days or the contract would be moved to a competitor. 30 days, $2.3 million. Victor had 17 days left and he was out of ideas. Michaela found the problem on a Tuesday night at 11:40 p.m. Zuri was asleep. Clover, the rabbit, tucked under her chin. Lorraine's apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clicking of a laptop that was 6 years old and ran hot if you used it for more than an hour. Michaela had been reviewing the Piedmont corridor routing data for a separate task when she noticed the same pattern she'd flagged weeks earlier in the local routes. The SteerPoint software calculated optimal paths based on distance, traffic density, and fuel efficiency. But it didn't account for seasonal weather, not meaningfully, not dynamically. It used static averages, annual averages, which meant that in winter, when ice, fog, and road closures altered conditions daily, the software was sending trucks down routes that looked efficient on screen, but were functionally impassable on the ground. The fix wasn't complicated. It required integrating a real-time weather overlay into the routing algorithm, something that could be done with an existing API that Sterling already licensed for another department but had never connected to logistics. Michaela wrote the proposal in 2 hours. Clear, concise, 7 pages. Problem identification, data evidence, proposed solution, implementation timeline, projected cost savings. She formatted it the way she'd formatted reports at Trident, clean and professional, because she didn't know how Sterling liked their documents and figured the safest option was to make it impossible to dismiss on presentation alone. She didn't send it to Grayson. She didn't have his email, and even if she had, the idea of a 5-month coordinator emailing the CEO directly felt like stepping onto a stage she hadn't been invited to. So she sent it to Patricia Hollis with a single line in the body. I noticed something in the Meridian routing data. I think this might help. Please let me know if I'm overstepping. Patricia read it the next morning, then read it again, then forwarded it to Grayson with her own single line. You need to see this. Grayson read it on his phone during his morning drive. By the time Owen pulled into the parking garage, he had read it 3 times. The solution was elegant. The data was sound, and the problem it addressed was one his senior operations team had failed to identify for 6 months. He called Michaela into his office at 10 a.m. She walked in, looking the way people look when they've been summoned by the person whose name is on the building. Nervous, controlled, hands clasped in front of her like a student called to the principal's office. You wrote this? Grayson asked, holding up his tablet. Yes, sir. Meridian's procurement team is coming in Friday for what they've described as a final meeting. I want you to present this to them. Michaela's face went still. Sir, I'm just a coordinator. I don't present to clients. I've never even been in a client meeting. You were just a coordinator, Grayson said. His voice was quiet, not harsh, just certain. Now you're the person who solved a $2.3 million problem that my senior team missed for 6 months. You found it. You explain it. Friday arrived. The Meridian team sat on one side of the conference table, 3 executives in dark suits with the particular stillness of people who had already made up their minds. Victor Hale sat at the far end, silent. His folder was closed. He had nothing new to offer. Michaela stood at the front of the room. She wore the same navy blazer, pressed, clean, the same blazer she'd walked 6 miles in. Beside her, a screen displayed her proposal. Her hands shook for the first 30 seconds. Then she started talking. Not performing, not selling. Just explaining. The way someone explains a problem they've lived inside of. The way someone who has spent her whole life finding the cheapest route, the fastest path, the most efficient way to stretch nothing into something, explains the logic of optimization to people who've only ever known abundance. She spoke for 14 minutes. When she finished, the room was silent. The Meridian procurement director leaned back in his chair, looked at his colleagues, then looked at Michaela. When can you implement this? Victor Hale didn't say a word. Not during the meeting, not after. He packed his folder, straightened his tie, and walked out of the conference room without looking at anyone. And Michaela stood by the window for a moment after everyone had left. The city stretched out below her. Rain was falling, light this time, almost gentle. She pressed her hand against the glass, the way someone else had pressed his hand against glass once, 14 floors up, watching a woman walk through a storm. She didn't know about that moment. She just stood there, feeling the cold through the window, and thought about how strange it was that the same rain that had once tried to stop her was now just weather, just water, just a Tuesday. 2 years later, Michaela Price sat in an office on the 9th floor of Sterling Logistics. Her name was on the door. Operations Manager, Southeast Division. 2 promotions in 24 months. Each one earned with the kind of quiet, relentless competence that made people forget she'd ever been the woman with the wet blazer. But she never forgot. Her office was modest by Sterling's standards. A desk, a bookshelf, a window facing east. On the bookshelf, between a logistics manual and a framed photo of Zuri on her first day of 3rd grade, sat a small object that visitors sometimes noticed but never asked about. Clover the rabbit, retired from active duty, ears still limp, placed there by Zuri herself, who declared that Mama's office needed someone to keep her company. Zuri was 9 now. She had her own bedroom in an apartment Michaela rented with her own paycheck. 2 bedrooms, clean kitchen, a radiator that worked, windows that let in light without letting in wind. It wasn't luxury, laminate counters, builder-grade carpet. But it was theirs. The door locked from the inside. The lease was in Michaela's name, and nobody could take it away. Zuri had health insurance, dental too. She'd had her ears checked 3 times in the past year, and every visit was covered. She was reading 2 grades above her level. She joined the school art club. Her latest project was a watercolor of a butterfly, pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a star. Michaela bought a car, used. A 10-year-old Toyota Camry with 94,000 miles and a scratch on the rear bumper that she never bothered to fix because it didn't affect the engine. And vanity was still a luxury she ranked below groceries. She drove it to work every morning. 19 minutes door to door, no matter the weather. She never walked 6 miles again, but the walk never left her. Grayson Sterling had changed too, though he would never describe it that way. He would say he'd adapted, recalibrated, adjusted his methodology based on new data. That was how his brain worked. But the people around him, Patricia, Owen, even Dean Whitaker, saw something different. Something softer wasn't the right word. Something wider. 8 months after Michaela's first promotion, Grayson announced a new internal initiative. He stood in front of the entire Charlotte office, 400 employees in the main atrium, and introduced a program he had been quietly developing for months, the 6 Mile Initiative, a comprehensive hiring and support program for single parents from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. It included subsidized transportation for the first 6 months, partnered childcare with 3 local providers, a 12-month mentorship track pairing, new hires with senior staff, resume workshops, interview coaching, and, most importantly, a hiring pipeline that evaluated candidates on demonstrated resilience and transferable skills rather than traditional credentials alone. No one in the room knew where the name came from. Grayson didn't explain it. He stood at the podium, read the details, took questions, and sat down. Professional, measured, controlled. But Michaela knew. She sat in the 3rd row, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward, and she knew exactly why it was called 6 Miles. And when Grayson's gaze swept the audience and landed on her for exactly 1 second, she nodded. Just once. Just enough. That was all they needed. 2 people who understood the origin of something without needing to name it. A shared memory sealed in the space between a rainstorm and a conference room and a cup of coffee that arrived without explanation. In the small office designated for the program on the 2nd floor, there was a glass frame mounted on the wall near the entrance. Inside it, pressed flat and slightly yellowed, was a plastic grocery bag, folded neatly, tied at the top, the kind you'd find in any kitchen drawer, in any apartment, in any city. Visitors glanced at it sometimes. Most assumed it was some kind of modern art, a statement piece. Nobody asked what it meant. But if you knew the story, if you knew what that bag had carried through 6 miles of rain, held against a chest that was soaking wet to protect documents that were perfectly dry, you would understand that it was the most expensive thing in the entire building, not in dollars, in what it cost the woman who carried it. In its first year, the 6 Mile Initiative placed 43 single parents in full-time positions across Sterling Logistics and its partner companies. 38 of them were still employed after 12 months. 26 had received at least 1 promotion. 11 had moved into stable housing for the first time in over a year. Numbers on a page. But behind every number was a morning, a decision, a pair of shoes, a walk that someone chose to take when every reasonable voice said, "Stop." Grayson Sterling had spent his life believing that words were free and therefore worthless. But the 6 Mile Initiative wasn't built on words. It was built on a walk, on a plastic bag, on a woman who showed up soaking wet with dry documents and said, I wasn't going to let rain take this away from me. And that, Grayson had learned, was worth more than anything he'd ever built. 2 years after she walked 6 miles through a November rainstorm, Michaela Price was driving to work on a Tuesday morning when the sky opened up. Not the slow, steady kind, the other kind. The sudden, furious, personal kind that turned windshield wipers useless and streetlights into smeared ghosts behind sheets of water. She was on Independence Boulevard, the same road, the same stretch she had walked 24 months earlier, in shoes that filled with water and a blazer that weighed more wet than dry. The Toyota's heater hummed. The seats were warm. The radio played something soft that Zuri had chosen before school drop-off, still set to the same station because Michaela never changed it. She liked driving in her daughter's world. Then she saw her, on the sidewalk, heading east. A woman, young, maybe 25, dark hair plastered to her face, a blazer that didn't fit right in the shoulders, and in her hands, pressed against her chest, a plastic bag, knotted at the top, wrapped around something flat. Documents. Michaela's foot moved to the brake before her brain formed a thought. The car slowed, stopped. She pulled to the curb, reached across, and opened the passenger door. The woman looked at her, startled, suspicious, soaked. "Get in," Michaela said. "I've been where you are." The woman hesitated, looked at the open door, at the warm car, at the dry seats, at the woman behind the wheel, whose eyes held something she couldn't name but somehow recognized. She got in. Michaela pulled back onto the road. The wipers beat their rhythm. The heater wrapped around both of them, and for a few blocks neither of them spoke. Then the woman said quietly, "I have an interview downtown. I couldn't afford the bus." Michaela nodded. "I know." She didn't explain how she knew. She didn't need to. Some things are understood between people who have carried documents through rain, who have chosen walking over waiting, who have learned that the distance between where you are and where you need to be is measured not in miles, but in the willingness to keep moving when every voice says stop. Michaela drove her to the building, watched her step out into the rain, straighten her blazer, and walk through the front door with her back straight and her bag held tight. Then Michaela sat in the car for a moment, engine running, wipers clearing the glass. She thought about Grayson Sterling, about a black Maybach 2 blocks behind her on a morning just like this one, about a man who watched from his car and didn't stop, who followed instead of helped, who observed instead of offered. She understood now why he had done it. The test, the distance, the need to see what someone does when no one is watching. But she also understood what he had missed, what it took him 2 years and a walked-through rainstorm to learn. You don't have to test people to see their worth. You just have to stop the car. The distance between where you are and where you belong is not measured in miles. It's measured in the number of people willing to stop and say, "Get in, I see you." Grayson had watched from his car. Michaela had walked through the rain. But in the end, it was Michaela who taught him the most expensive lesson of his life, that the test you design for someone else is always, in the end, a test for yourself. And she had passed. Not by walking 6 miles, not by arriving on time, not by keeping her documents dry while her body shook with cold. She passed by stopping the car, by doing the one thing Grayson couldn't do on that November morning, by looking at a stranger in the rain and choosing, without hesitation, without calculation, without a single thought about what it might cost or what she might gain, to simply help. That was the lesson. That was the whole story. Not wealth, not power, not the distance between a Maybach and a pair of wet shoes. Just a woman who remembered what it felt like to walk alone and refused to let anyone else do it. Wow. Just wow. What a story, right? I'm so curious to know what you guys are thinking right now. How did that story make you feel? Did it hit you the same way it hit me? Let me know down in the comments, and also tell me where you're tuning in from. I absolutely love seeing our community stretching from coast to coast and all over the world. And on a more personal note, I truly hope you and your family are all safe and doing okay out there. Seriously, sending you all so much love and peace. Speaking of comments, if you have a wild, unbelievable, or just a truly heartwarming true story of your own, I would love to hear it. Drop it down below. I read as many as I can. All right, that's all from me for now. If you felt something from this video, a simple thumbs up would mean the world. And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next story, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Stay safe, everyone. Talk to you soon.